Traversal.
The dictionary definition of traversal is the act or process of passing across, over, or through. Now, we're gamers over here, so our definition is slightly a little bit different to that, placing more focus on how you get from point A to point B. For us, it's an all-encompassing definition that essentially identifies and explains the traveling experience. How does your character, how does the person that you play as get from point A to point B? Now, I made a statement, just making a little post on community. I posted it on over on True Gaming over there on Reddit. I said that traversal is unfortunately one of the most neglected aspects of the gaming experience. Now, the purpose of this video is to analyze traversal, compare it to different titles, and really analyze how important is traversal. Am I possibly placing too much emphasis on it, or is it something that should be looked at? Let's get into the video. Now, of course, a little disclaimer, we're gonna make this clear, the type of games that we're analyzing over here. There's some games that are built upon traversal, and that's all the game is, such as racing games and such. These aren't really interesting or have anything to really do with the topic I'm talking about. The games I'm talking about are more so the open world genre. Whether it be games such as Spider-Man, Batman, GTA, open world RPGs, where traversal is a component of the entire gameplay experience and not necessarily the main, meat and bones of the entire experience. So it's merely a significant or insignificant component depending on the game. Now, getting from point A to point B is the very essence of an open world game. It's quite a significant part of it that we may sometimes overlook. And unfortunately, what I've experienced in recent years is that many games fail to make this traversal or form of transportation even remotely interesting as it should be. Rare do I find someone like, hey man, I really enjoy the traveling in games such as Assassin's Creed, or in games such as Far Cry, or in the many other multitude of open world games we have available to us. And that's kind of a problem. And I'm hoping that this video will help to point out that why this feature needs to be really looked at by game developers to try and improve it and to make it a really interesting and exciting part of the gameplay experience. Now, of course, they're like, oh, come on, bro. Explicit Sage. There are plenty of games that have great traversal. Of course, and I definitely agree with you, but there aren't as many as there should be. If we're talking about these type of games, we're talking about Spider-Man, Batman Arkham City, Batman Arkham Knight, Infamous, all these type of games, but there's something in common that these games have. They're superhero, supernatural-esque type of games. It's very rare to have a very exciting or interesting traversal system in a game that is somewhat based in reality. And of course, there are some arguments when you're pushing for realism that it makes sense that they were able to tackle the games in those particular ways. But there is a problem nonetheless. Traversal is a core game mechanic that each and every player has to deal with, particularly in an open world game. And traversal has increased in importance because of the climate of the gaming industry. The entire gaming industry has become oversaturated with open world games. And unfortunately, the gaming industry in general has chosen to take a different direction. Instead of improving in terms of depth, they've improved and increased in terms of size. So because we have a very large open world that isn't very detailed, traversal becomes far more important and necessary. So, for example, I'll give you an example such as the game Assassin's Creed Odyssey. A game that I honestly have very mixed feelings about. Not one of my favorite games, but that's a topic for another day. The main point that I want to bring across to you is how disappointing the traversal was. And by that I mean I did not enjoy traveling from point A to point B. Assassin's Creed and Ubisoft in general suffers from the curse of prioritizing quantity over quality. They have great huge maps with beautiful vistas, but unfortunately in terms of depth and interesting things to do, it's very lacking and tends to be more on the generic side. But what I'll say is that traveling from point A to point B was very, very disappointing after you've played the game for about maybe 20 hours, and you've probably still got another 80 hours to go before you end up finishing the game, because it's a very long experience. But if I were to see that I'm given a quest here and whatever side character that I'm speaking to tells me, hey, you need to travel and go fetch this for me, and I see that it's 4,000 meters or 6,000, 8,000 meters away, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I need to get back on the horse, or call my horse and get back on this trail. And unfortunately, because exploration isn't exactly encouraged in this game, because you really just follow map markers, and you're never going to really find a piece of loot that is particularly special, as you'll get that loot from the various mercenaries that you fight. So if I saw something was 8,000 meters away, I dread the feeling as I'd have to go on a boring horse ride and hold X to follow the road for a minute or so. And if there isn't a clear-cut road, sometimes you'd go off the beaten path and try and find your way through the cliff faces, and of course there's fall damage. So it was a troublesome experience. But if I juxtapose that to my traversal experience over in Spider-Man, traversal is a core component of the game, and it's clear as day that it was made important and not as an afterthought as it is in some other games. Swinging from building to building, from place to place, is absolutely enjoyable. Now I understand that exact feeling isn't going to be able to achieved to the same level as these superhero games, because you're essentially flying, you're swinging from it's ridiculous. You can't expect to have as much fun swinging in a Spider-Man game as you are in a game that is set in somewhat bit of realism. But what I will say is that innovation would be greatly, and I mean very greatly, encouraged and appreciated if they were to do so. This traversal issue stems from a somewhat larger problem of, open world games simply being too large. Games such as Deus Ex Mankind Divided, game you might not have heard of, but a very great title. It has open world hubs. So instead of a very large open world, it has a much smaller one, but it's much more detailed, and there's so much more to find, and there's much more depth. In that game, you're not worried about traversal, because anywhere that you go, you're going to find something interesting there, and the open world hubs aren't very large in general. But because game developers and companies have chosen to expand it to such great lengths, it's needed that the traversal system step its game up to compensate for the loss of depth and interest. In Deus Ex Mankind Divided, all you do is just walk around as Adam Jensen. There are no cars, bicycles, because they truly aren't needed. You'll get from point A to point B so quickly that you won't even notice it. And this is why I don't know if it's old age or perhaps experience in gaming for so many years, but over time I've truly learned to really appreciate linear titles. I'm someone who now prefers quality over quantity. Back in the day, of course, the open world games were the new and cool thing. You essentially playing in your own cool playground where you could do anything. And I think the feeling why I have this, fatigue of this, formula that's been, so prevalent in the gaming industry right now is, one, because of the oversaturation of open world games. There are so many open world games, even to this day, that continue to being made, with the main culprit, of course, being Ubisoft and other game companies. But I think the other reason is because of the lack of innovation. The worlds have gotten bigger, but ways haven't been found to make these open world games and such more interesting. Now, personally, I haven't played Elden Ring as yet, and I'm interested to see their take on the open world experience. I truly really enjoyed Dark Souls 3. I had a great time with that, and I have all the Souls game. I'll eventually get to that, but I'm still waiting to see an open world game that's still large but keeps me engaged and encourages exploration, because unfortunately map markers tend to be the main culprit that pushes us away from exploration. Now, this is something you have to understand about me. If I'm ever going to actively complain about something or point out a flaw, I feel that you can't just point something out and not come up with a viable solution. So this is what I want to point out, and some possible ideas to try and make traversal more fun in these type of games, because it's definitely necessary. Open world games aren't going away anytime soon. While I definitely do love linear games, they're not going anywhere, and I'm sure there are going to be some really good open world titles that are going to be introduced. Now, here are a couple of my solutions. Number 1, encourage open world hubs rather than huge open worlds. This was executed really well in God of War. God of War is actually, if you really think about it, kind of an open world game, but it was very well executed as they made you tackle it in a much more linear way, and it was always fragmented. You're always following the journey and the path. So you never felt overwhelmed, and you never had too much access, as many areas and things were blocked by under upgrades that you would get as you progressed with the main story. So in my opinion, open world hubs are much better ways to have an interesting open world game. Deus Ex Mankind Divided is a game that comes to mind that also executes this very well. There's so much depth in that game, and the city of Prague and the Czech Republic in that game is much more memorable than many of the other games I've played, such as Far Cry 3, Assassin's Creed Rome. While those places are very beautiful to look at, the depth is sorely lacking. Now, I think something that's vital and going to be a very difficult decision for developers to make is how much realism can we sacrifice to ensure that traversal is fun. Because of course, guys, we're over here playing a video game. I think to a certain degree, realism can be sacrificed to a point so that we can have a fun traversal system. What comes to mind is perhaps something like the glider that you find in Breath of the Wild, something like the glider you find in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. They're interesting ways where you can input things to make traversal a little bit more fun and exciting. Glider, for example, also found in the multiple Far Cry games. So there are different ways that come to mind in order to try and fix this issue. Well, perhaps this isn't exactly a solution, but rather make a linear game. In general times, people and game companies tend to shy away from the linear experience, but honestly, they're one of my most memorable experiences, and there's so much more things interesting to see and do in games that are more on the linear side and you follow an interesting journey. Not exactly a roller coaster, but everywhere you turn is interesting and not generic. So those are the powers of a linear title. So you can put that as number 3, perhaps focus on trying to make an interesting linear game. While people genuinely love GTA 5, and I'm one of them, I really enjoy that single player campaign and that entire story that they told. But Max Payne 3, which ran on on the same engine, played amazingly, and there's so many more memorable moments in that game because it was so, especially the favelas. That favela level was absolutely sensational. So it's little things like that really make you appreciate how good linear games are. So, as I was saying, but guys, truly the main purpose of this video is to try and to motivate developers and just to get your juices flowing and to point out that traversal is a really important part of the experience. Driving around in GTA, swinging around in Spider-Man, gliding in Batman Arkham Knight. These are pivotal and important parts of the entire gameplay experience, and these areas of gameplay haven't been innovated for about a decade. Let's be honest. Think about it. The swinging mechanic isn't anything new. This was, kind of perfected back in the 2000s. When did Spider-Man 2006, 2005 on the PlayStation 2? That was a great swinging mechanic. The gliding, I'll give respect to the people over at Rocksteady Games. That was a great gliding mechanic. But in terms of other open world games, there really hasn't been any noteworthy innovation in terms of traversal. And as I said, let's sacrifice a bit of realism so we can have a much more interesting traversal experience, because I don't want to play another game where I see my objective is 4,000 meters away and dread having to travel to that place. I want to improve gaming. I want to make the gaming experience better for everybody, and I hope that this video will make you think about traversal and maybe come up with some ideas of your own how we can improve in this system. Put your thoughts down in the comments. Tell me what you think. How can traversal be improved in video games, in a game such as GTA? Well, maybe not GTA, because there's a lot of fun ways to play and drive around cars, and I'd say that game isn't exactly struggling in that regard, but there are definitely other games that could do well with the overhaul in terms of traversal and in making the overall traveling experience better. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching the video. This was my first videos on specific gaming topic that I had some interest in. Of course, this channel covers everything gaming, not just patient gamer reviews. We're going to talk about everything that's interesting in the gaming market, and traversal was something that's been on my mind for the longest time, especially if you're someone who plays quite a wee bit of open world games, play a couple of Ubisoft games. It can get quite frustrating at how bland or how dry how dry it is to travel from point A to point B. So hopefully this can get you thinking and just have a conversation and a dialogue about the entire traversal experience. So thanks guys for watching the video. Once again, like, comment and subscribe. Tell me what you guys think in the comments. Am I crazy? Am I bugging? Does the traversal system not need to be changed at all, or is there room for improvement in terms of traveling from point A to point B? Subscribe to the channel. Wait on my next content. More content is definitely on the way. More reviews, more gaming topics. Next video could possibly be the Need for Speed review. I'm wrapping that up. I'm enjoying it quite a bit. Haven't played a Need for Speed game in probably a decade. That's how long it's been. But yeah guys, more content on the way. Stay tuned. Take it easy guys.